Hi, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today. Sorry about the delay, but in the world we're all living through, today of all days, my technology setup that I've been perfecting to do these types of things over the last 8 months decided not to cooperate. But anyways, I'm excited that we're getting started. Really excited about the session we have for you today. One of Google's mantras is building technology for everyone, and that means everyone. And for me personally, representation, fairness, and inclusion have always been top priorities. I've been lucky in my career to witness the power and success of diverse teams of talented people working across strong organizational cultures. And our theme for today's panel is focused on how we become actionable allies. All of you on this panel go above and beyond being amazing allies, and it's an honor to host this alongside you today. I'm delighted to welcome Angela McKenna, SVP Talent Experience at Salesforce, Grace Francis, Chief Experience Officer of Karmarama, I had to make sure I got that one right, an Accenture interactive company, and Mira McCann, Lead Talent Partner at Kin+Carta Create. So I think the way that I thought we would just start off, obvious, is let's just do some introductions. And why don't we just start with you, Angela? Tell us who you are, a little bit about your role and where you're based.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, sure.
Hi, it's really nice to be here with everyone. So I'm Angela McKenna. I look after talent experience at Salesforce. I'm based here in London. And I'm actually only here because of the phenomenal leaders that we have in our company who've been sponsoring this amazing initiative. So I'm going to give a bit of a shameless plug for our team and for Sharon and Femina, who because of them I'm here today. So great to be here.
Great to have you, Angela. Grace, over to you.
Hello, yes, I'm Grace Francis. I'm the Chief Experience Officer of Karmarama in London, and today I'm sitting at home on the very edge of the Thames, which is why we have such nice lighting. And for me, this is very much about creating cultures and spaces that are relevant for where we work, but also for our clients as well. I think employee experience is really the new frontier of customer experience.
Great. And Mira, last but certainly not least.
Thank you. So yes, I'm Mira McCann, and I head up the talent acquisition and development functions for Kin+Carta Europe. Based in London and living in Hertfordshire at the moment. And a lot of the work that I do is around ensuring that we're hiring the best diverse talent that we can to grow our business in line with business goals.
Great. So a warm welcome to all three of you. We're excited to be part of the I Am Remarkable week. I Am Remarkable is a Google initiative that strives to empower everyone, but particularly women and underrepresented groups, to celebrate their achievements in the workplace and beyond. I was lucky enough to do an I Am Remarkable workshop about a month ago, and it was a fantastic experience. I could go on for a long time about all the takeaways and how moving the experience was, but maybe a really big one for me was it's not bragging if it's based on facts. And I'm going to use that as a segue with our panelists to kick off with the first question. And this time, why don't we start with you, Mira? What makes you remarkable?
So I am remarkable because I have a teen-year-old daughter. She was actually born with a rare disability, so she has one leg shorter than the other. And she's just at the age now where she's starting to become aware of the fact that she's different. So I'm working with her, we're working with her as a family to show her that anything's possible. And she's just starting to really show that she's owning her disability. She's super sassy and determined. And I'm really proud of how we're overcoming obstacles together as a family. And it's also given me a new and different perspective on the world as well. I'm seeing things through a different lens, which I never had before. So yeah, happy about that.
Very cool. Angela, how about you?
Yeah, sure. That was amazing, Mira. Thank you for sharing. I'm remarkable because in the role I have in the company I work in, I'm able to name and create what I call integrated leadership. And that means that future organizations need to elevate leaders who can integrate heart and results. And sometimes that's uncomfortable and awkward for those who are currently in leadership. And it's not where we are today. So it takes courage, but it's something I'm very proud of. And I do it because I want a different workplace for my daughter, who's 11. I would like her to have a different workplace than we did when we went into the workplace.
I love that as a father of 2 daughters myself. Angela, Grace, what makes you remarkable?
Thank you. So for me, I am remarkable because I'm using the tools that we so often use for our day-to-day jobs for clients, design thinking, to apply empathy and investigation into what it means to bring your whole self to work and authenticity. And for me, that really comes from a space of applying like radical inclusivity for everybody in a room. So thinking about what it means to be intersectional, thinking about what it means to bring your whole self to work. I myself am non-binary, so I'm walking into rooms and explaining to people about my gender identity, sometimes just as they catch my surname. But also recognizing that in that means everybody has a space according to privilege as well as according to inclusivity.
Great. Thank you, Grace. So next question, with the topic of allyship, I might come back and start with you, Angela. Can you tell us a bit about your journey to allyship? Maybe sharing some examples of when you needed an ally.
Yeah, it's a great question. Thinking about something very recent. I think being very mindful of the values of the organization that you work in is really important. And actually, Chris, when you and I met each other first, Chris actually was one of the people who interviewed me at Salesforce. And at the time, my daughter was 3. And you'll remember this well, Chris. He was interviewing me. My daughter just showed up in the room and got up on my lap. And I remember at the time, this is like 5-6 years ago, thinking, well, that interview didn't go well. And I got the job. And so it's given me a level of courage, I think. And if I think about recent times when I've needed allyship, I am currently working on sort of our sort of long range plan at Salesforce. And one of the things that I was noticing recently is the language that we use. And language is really powerful. One of the things I've noticed since the pandemic is that there is a movement back to more conventional type of language around business. So things like driving, accelerating, all of which are really good words in and of themselves. But I kind of really felt like we were not thinking about how we respond, how we listen, how we show empathy. And I honestly was like a little bit hesitant to start contributing that immediately. So I called Amy Weaver, who's our chief legal officer, and said, look, this is something that's coming up for me. What should I do? And she was like, you should go straight into that document and start naming it. And you should talk to other allies in the business. And, you know, even at the role that I'm in, sometimes I doubt myself and realize that I have the permission to do that. So that's probably one really recent example of when I've needed allyship and being lucky enough to be able to reach out to other leaders in the organization, having that community.
Great, thanks, Angela. Grace, same question to you. Journey to allyship, and maybe an example or two where you needed an ally.
So for me, I think a really great privilege of being very successful in my career and established in my career before allowing people to know about how I truly identify in terms of my gender. And with that, I've often thought about what it would be like if I was entering the workforce openly as a non-binary person. So I had a really wonderful experience of allyship, of coming out and sitting down with my CEO and explaining to him about my gender identity and my gender expression and how he might see me looking different than he'd known me historically, but then also reaching out across to different people in the organization, some of them getting one-to-one talks, but some of them just getting an email, and feeling absolutely honored with the response I got. People being warm and accepting, people being open to ask questions, not being worried about that. And one of the things I was really concerned about was, what about the people who work underneath me in a team? What if they wanted to raise a question? What if they did feel uncomfortable? Would they not be able to come to me about feeling uncomfortable? And would they have someone to come to? And so again, by leaning on my allies and allies across the company, I was able to make sure that everybody was able to examine what this meant about my identity and had a space to talk about it that didn't necessarily mean coming to me.
Thanks, Grace. Gosh, you made me think about so many things in that story. The power of people being able to show up as their full selves, and the realization for others about what that unleashes. So I love that story. Mira, same question to you, please.
Yeah, sure. So I think for me, my journey to being a good ally has really come from talking to people, but really listening and understanding without judgment. I think it's so important to understand someone's background and their lived experiences, and how your lived experiences can really influence and inform the person that you are today. And I think when you meet someone in a professional environment, there can be so much a person has been through in their lives prior to you meeting them, that I think taking the time to really understand how an individual would like you to support them, not necessarily how you think you should support them, is massively important. And that's certainly how I've always tried to support the people around me. I think with regards to a specific example of where I've needed an ally, to be honest, I think there's been so many different touch points through my professional career that actually for me it's more important about having an ally who kind of can go on that journey with you, rather than a specific event or time for me.
I've noticed on Mira and Grace, we lost a couple words there at the end, but if they were anywhere near as good as everything else you said, thank you. That was really great. Let me switch back now a little bit to the I am remarkable theme, and it was great the way that all of you told your stories. And I may start with you, Grace, and maybe you could just talk to us about how you've encouraged others through mentoring to build their own I am remarkable stories. And I'll do the same thing to Angela to Mira, and then Angela third.
So for me, my personal story. Sorry, I'll just give that a second. My personal story is very interesting. It started when I was 25, and unexpectedly I was diagnosed with cancer. And when I was diagnosed, I felt that while the NHS is an amazing system, it's very hard to navigate when you're young and when you're in shock. At any point in your life, it's hard to navigate, especially when you're dealing with news. And I was using design thinking to help me both have empathy for the service providers, for the nurses that were engaging with me, for the doctors who were incredibly busy and sometimes dealing with people whose cancer was more advanced, but also using investigation to be able to determine what decisions do I want to make, what's important to me as I question whether I will keep my health, or I had cervical cancer, so in that case, my reproductive system. And when I finally got to my doctor, he said, "How did you get to me so quickly without firm test results? We didn't know how bad your cancer was. How did you get to the top of my list?" And I explained logic through design thinking, and he said, "This has saved your life." And I didn't really think about it at the time because I was working out what it meant to process that experience. And I can tell you now, I'm very well. I'm completely cancer-free, and that's a wonderful experience to have. But what I found was that nascent experience of using those tools myself laddered up to me mentoring other people and allowing them to use tools to help them make better decisions, but also better understand others as well. So when we come in contact with anyone, I think our greatest desire is to feel like we've understood, even if we've come from radically different spaces, even if we're in radically different headspaces in that moment in time. And so I think it's important to hold in mind who we are and our identities, but also what we might be experiencing. And I think in COVID, we've seen a lot more vulnerability. We don't start with, hi, how are you? I'm fine, which is a very English thing to do. We've got used to saying, how are you? And people saying, actually, do you know what? I want to tell you what's going on in my life. And that permission to bring our authenticity to work. So for me, COVID has really been able to speed up that opportunity for us to be authentic, but has also helped me use those tools when I'm mentoring other people and allow them to use those tools when they're engaging with others as well. And that's very much about the relationship of being understood. And when you are understood, being able to then start to understand someone else as well. And I think that core empathy is what's going to make us better at work and better in the whole of our lives as well.
Amazing. Thank you, Grace. Before you started using the word authenticity at the end of that, I was thinking, my gosh, this has been an amazing panel so far on how authentic you all are in sharing these stories. So thanks for sharing a very personal story. Mira, do you have examples of sort of where you've mentored people to discover the power of I Am Remarkable?
Yeah, so for me, I think it's really where I've worked with people to recognise their achievements and then also encouraged an open feedback culture within the teams that I've been a part of. I think we all can recognise that some people naturally find it really hard to talk about themselves and their own achievements. And for me, it's about bringing it back to reminding people that it's definitely not bragging if you're, saying the truth and being genuine. And basing, what you're saying on facts, and that can push people outside of their comfort zones. It certainly pushed me massively outside of mine when I first did the I Am Remarkable workshops earlier this year. But through doing it and practicing it and realizing that you're not bragging, it can be really powerful. And I've also worked with people who have that sort of fear and think that they can't do something, but have actually faced the fears and gone on to do it. And I tend to encourage people to sort of jot down what they were worried about and how they overcame it, keep a bit of a log, and then revisit that when you're next in that situation where you feel really scared. And then lastly, I'd say to not put pressure on yourself. Being remarkable doesn't mean that you have to have run a marathon or physically climbed a mountain. The things that make you remarkable, it's a really personal thing. So recognize the small hurdles and barriers that you've overcome as big achievements, because they probably are.
Yeah, great point. I think probably from the workshop that I did, Mira, that was one of my biggest takeaways, is just us all appreciating the things that make us special and who we are, and that maybe everyone doesn't think about every day, or we don't think they think would be important. It doesn't matter. We need to give ourselves that credit. Angela, can I ask you on the same?
Yeah, you can. I mean, what amazing stories both Grace and Mira have shared. I think for me, what really resonated with me with the I Am Remarkable movement was an idea of patterns that many of us have developed, which is about staying small. It's something I certainly resonated with, and a very good mentor of mine once said a quote to me. It's a Joseph Campbell quote, and it says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek." And that's what I feel I Am Remarkable does. Many of us, many women, many underrepresented groups, or we come from cultures which are very much fit in, conform, don't be loud, and that power and authority looks a certain way. It's definitely something that I resonated with. When I think about how I encourage others, it's very much this idea of how to find your voice. And if I can tell a personal story, when I joined the company I'm with now, it's a very performative company, which is a very good thing, but I couldn't see myself in it, and I couldn't see myself in the people. And for the first 6 months in the job, I was like, this is not the company for me. I've made a horrible mistake. And what I've learned to appreciate and understand, that it is the fact that I am distinctive that means I do belong. And so when I think about what this movement is doing and what my role is, that's really how I try to encourage others. You don't have to be performative. You don't have to be the loudest, but you definitely shouldn't stay small.
Thank you. Thank you, Angela. Can you repeat that quote again?
Yeah, of course, I'd be happy to. So it's a quote by Joseph Campbell, and it says, "The cave you fear to enter holds the treasure you seek."
So I was trying to lock that into my brain, and hopefully some of the other people wanted to hear that again as well. That's an amazing, powerful quote. We've talked a little bit about this, but I'm going to ask the three of you to go a little bit deeper in terms of within your own teams. When you think about belonging, and I Am Remarkable is a tool, and there are others, and Grace referred to some of that. I'll come back to and start with you, Angela, but maybe you can just talk about like how do you try to create a culture of belonging and allyship in your teams?
Well, without sounding like I'm too institutionalized, we've actually put it in our goals. We have a goal setting process called a V2 Mom, and my team, the talent experience team, along with my wonderful leadership team, have actually created a method which is belonging. And in that, we have our own definition of what that means. It's about making our values a reality, not just writing them down. It's about what they look like when you see them. One of the things that I've been really deliberate about is my team has recently expanded to bring in internal recruiting and also our onboarding team. And they've come from, different parts of the organization. And I didn't want it to feel like a takeover, like a talent development takeover. And so we're very deliberate around how do we create a sense of belonging so that everybody sees themselves in this function. And so it was really about, as a leadership team, getting together, writing it down. We've actually formed what we call a belonging council, where we have our definition of it, and we have various different things that we do as a group to create that sense of belonging. But that's one of the things that I personally have done with my leadership team and with our function here.
Thank you, Angela. Grace, you've already talked a little bit about this, so I'm looking forward to hearing more about how you think about belonging and how you've worked belonging and allyship into your team.
Thank you. Yes, I think it's really important to hold in mind both the principles we're talking about, but then also the people sitting at the table with us and making a space that everybody feels they can be heard, that they can raise a view. And sometimes that's really going into the granularity of what was said in that last meeting. Did you feel that worked for you? And it's something I took from very early on in my career that resonates very, very well in Karmarama is if someone isn't speaking up, to say, "Would love to hear from you. Would you be up to do that?" And again, being a good ally, saying if someone is spoken over or interrupted, and sometimes it's by clients, not necessarily internally, just calling back and being able to create those spaces in the moment, and then afterwards psychologically safe spaces to say, what can we do more? Because I think we've got the groundwork there. We've got an inclusive space. Everybody has a seat at the table, and then it's just not presuming that we've got it right all of the time, and understanding day by day, hour by hour, feelings can shift, and being able to check in and have those relationship points where you can really validate what else could we do, recognizing we're never going to be perfect, for me just creates a better space, and also an environment where sometimes we haven't thought of something and someone feels comfortable saying, actually, I want to raise this, and then they do. And that for me is the most significant thing we can do day to day, hour to hour.
Great, thank you, Grace. Mira, can I ask you the same question around belonging and allyship in your teams?
Yeah, sure. So I think largely it goes back to a little bit around what I was saying earlier around really ensuring that everyone has a voice and that you're providing people that you work with the platform to bring their authentic selves to work. And by understanding individuals fully, you can be flexible and adaptable in your approach. So we've got some safe spaces that we've created for people at Kin+Carta, so what we call affinity groups. So we have a few different ones, but one for women in the company, one for parents, one for people from the LGBT community, a multicultural group. And that's a safe space for people to share their experiences and lean on each other for support where needed as well. There are also, I think, some small things that you can do to create a more inclusive environment and give people a sense of belonging, such as adding pronouns on Slack when you're in a physical space, supplying sanitary products, not just in women's toilets, inclusive photography as well. That's super important. And then creating a space where people feel really welcome within your organization and know that they belong. And it's worth also mentioning that we always, like, this is never done. We always want to be continuously improving what we're doing. So I think the point around asking people for feedback and continuously asking what we can do better, what we can do differently, and listening to that feedback and really acting on it. And I think even more so now, whilst we're not all in the same space together, we're all working remotely, it's so much more important to check in with people and just make sure that we're listening and doing things as best we can.
No doubt that the current environment has sort of forced all of us to try to dial up, our paying attention skills. Mary, you mentioned this earlier, talking about some, fear. We all have fear, and if we think about allyship and journeys of allyship, we all make mistakes. We say the wrong things, even with good intention. How do you all keep yourselves motivated and overcome the fear of getting things wrong? Grace, can I start with you?
I'm so sorry. I'm going to just ask you to repeat the question because I lost you for a second there.
Okay. Yeah, I know we're having a little bit of sound glitches. Did you lose the whole question?
I did. I'm so sorry.
No problem. So I was saying that, in our journey of allyship, we make mistakes. We say things wrong. We're often with good intentions. But how do you all keep yourselves motivated, and how do you overcome the fear of getting things wrong?
So I think that good intentions is precisely right. Presuming that everybody you interact with has the very best of intention, even when you perhaps suspect they might not, goes a long way when you're walking into a room. I think about this on a personal basis when someone misgenders me. I think about it when I walk into a room and someone says, "You look awfully young for your job," or anything in between, when they make a joke about the clothes I'm wearing. But it really, really carries through to be able to create a space to engage at that moment. So presuming the best, but also saying it would be absolutely wonderful to rectify this right now. What I find very interesting is living openly with who you are and bringing that into each meeting, each engagement, every time you turn up to meet someone new. And if you get used to doing that, the fear starts to fade. And I don't know what doors have closed for me. The moment I first told someone I was non-binary, I don't know what doors in my career closed for the whole of my career going ahead. And some of those doors will have also opened as well. And I sometimes find myself lying awake at night wondering, especially as because I can pass as a woman relatively easily, would it have been simpler? Would it have been better? And for me, fighting that fear really comes down to thinking about every time I do a talk and someone comes up to me afterwards and says, thank you, I'm trans, or I'm non-binary, or even I'm a cis person, and it's good to see someone like you representing. And I hope that I'm laying a path for others to follow, but I also hope by bringing an authenticity to myself at work, I'm encouraging others to do the same, even when we are met with an imperfect response. And what I have found is that people will open up about themselves far more freely, because I've been vulnerable, they will be vulnerable, and then we make a deeper connection. And it's worth engaging. It's worth coming to work, because we're having those real conversations and we're getting to know people.
Thank you, Grace. Mira, how about you?
Yes, I think it goes back to recognizing where you've made a mistake before, and actually thinking back to that. And more often than not, the repercussions are probably not as bad as you thought they would be. And if you're willing to be quite open and honest about the fact that you have made a mistake, people will generally be really forgiving, and also work with you to improve where you may have been able to say or do something differently, depending on what the situation is that you're faced with. And I think the thing that helps me with that kind of overcoming a fear is really, if I'm doing something that where I'm pushing myself outside of my comfort zone, or I've not done it before, and make sure that I've got a good support network around me. So having one or two people who I really trust to run through my approach and thinking, that helps me face the fears. But there are also people who would challenge me in the right way as well, and make me think really critically about what I'm saying and how I'm coming across. And I think it's okay to signpost fears as well. You know, we're all human and everybody has them. And it's okay to say that you're not fully comfortable with something, and let people know that. And again, asking for feedback afterwards on how you handled something and where you might be able to improve your handling of it as well.
Yeah, great points, Grace. Angela, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, there are great points. I mean, the first thing I would say is it's hard, right? I mean, this is not easy. I think that for me, part of it is a bit wiser with age, I guess, as a Gen Xer. As I've got to a certain stage, I'm like, you know, if I have a curious and open mindset, and I'm of the mindset that we're all a work in progress, because we are, all of us, no matter who we are, what stage, what age we're at, we are all a work in progress. I think one of the things that I've noticed recently, and I see it in our organization, is sometimes the fear of saying the wrong thing stops people from engaging, and that can be corrosive on one end. And then the other dynamic that I see happening at the moment is an exhaustion from underrepresented groups of constantly having to be the teachers and having to bear the burden of that. And it's not something that I think we can necessarily solve, but I think it's something that a lot of us are walking through and working through at the moment. I think the way I think about it is an idea of openness to learning for all of us. So, you know, recognizing that we're all a work in progress, having a curious mindset yourself, recognizing that we all have things that we have to unlearn and relearn, and then leveraging, you know, smart people around me and the community around me that I trust and I know I can look to for help and support.
Great, thanks, Angela. And Angela, you mentioned this before a little bit around sort of, you know, one of the ways you've tried to make this stick is putting it into the plan, or the methods, I think you called it. I'd be interested in, and maybe I'll start with Mira this time. I'd be interested in hearing kind of ideas around how do you make allyship systematic in your business, so it's not just you and a few others championing it, but it sort of catches fire and moves through an organization.
So I would say one of the key ways that we have done and are doing that within our businesses by having a continuous program around education and awareness. So there's a few things that we've done, such as we're currently rolling out unconscious bias training to everybody, so that people can really are able to understand and recognize biases and be able to challenge those and keep yourself in check. And I really think that understanding your biases are one of the first hurdles you need to overcome to become a good and a true ally. We've also created a reverse mentoring program. So our senior leadership team are paired with 1 or 2 mentors, and they are people from underrepresented groups within the business. And they work together to really understand the true challenges that people have faced in their lives and their careers. And I think that education piece is so hugely important. We've run some white privilege workshops to enable people to really understand what white privilege is and how you can use your position to be an ally. And then some other things like career stories, so elevating people from underrepresented backgrounds in like a kind of informal company panel Q&A type session. And we've also running a program at the moment called Pass the Mic, where every Tuesday our social media channels are passed over to somebody from an underrepresented group to share their story as well. So there's some of the things that we do that's based around that education and raising awareness.
Great, love it. Angela, I know you talked a little bit about it, but let me get you to share a little bit more, if you would.
Yeah, sure. So I think, again, definitely making it a priority across the organization, defining what allyship is and isn't as well. I know we've talked before about, the difference between performative allyship and active allyship. One of the things that we've been really deliberate about is how we not just train and enable our allies, but how we continue to support them, because we don't have a lack of people stepping forward to be allies. But what we do have is a need to sort of create and continue to put support around allies, so that when things get uncomfortable, that they stay in it and they can work through it. And part of what we've learned is that if allyship is easy and isn't at times uncomfortable, it's probably not having the impact it needs to. So really being deliberate around our allyship programs and putting more support around allies longer term, so they have a support network around them as well as they unlearn, and do their own learning.
That's great. Yeah, really good. Grace, would you share a little bit with us on that?
Thank you. I think it's very much what both the other panelists have already spoken about, which is that integrated training. I would extend and build onto that to say, I think it's very important that training often comes from an outside source, that people who identify as diverse aren't being asked to do that housework, aren't being asked to do that for free as a side of desk activity, while they are deeply included and intrinsic to that process. It's about saying, let's hire professionals to come in to take that role and to be able to benchmark us and independently, objectively tell us how we're doing, tell us how we can grow. And with that, really challenge us to move on, to continue to progress. I also think, for me personally, there's the idea of radical inclusivity, which is to say, while we're being allies, thinking about our socio-political identities and who we are, it's also thinking about the context of what it means to live in everyday life. And one of the things about the human condition is life is long, but it's hard, and it can be beautiful, and it can be difficult. It can be all of these different things at different times. And people in positions of privilege, you can be a cis white het male and have a really, really hard time. And that could have been something about going on in your life. That could be because we're going through a pandemic right now. It can be lots of things. So offering compassion and radical inclusivity, for me, is at the heart of allyship. It's not just about saying, Where do we need to create a space where everybody's included? Is about saying, let's look at each of us as individuals and humans, beyond intersectionality, and as individuals to say, right, what do you need today and how can we help you do that? And part of an institute of any organised workplace is a duty of care to all employees.
So I was coming to my final question, Grace, and it was about, you talk about radical inclusivity. What I wanted to ask you all was if you had one piece of advice for everyone in closing, like how can people drive better inclusivity? So maybe Grace, I'll come right back to you and sort of let you peel the onion on what you were talking about there a little bit.
Yeah, I think it's about recognizing the person in front of you as a fully fledged human being. I mentored a person who, on one of the worst days of their life, they were leaving, their partner was in hospital, and it didn't look good at all. And on his way home, on the tube, someone was incredibly cross and having a very bad day, and pushed him on the tube, and he fell. And he was able to hold in that moment that he knew he was having one of the worst days of his life. And that meant he could think about the other person and step away from that conflict and say, I don't know what's going on with this other person's life. And one of the hardest things I think to hold in mind is that each of our own psyches has a different response to what we're facing. There can be days when something terrible happens and we can feel like in the moment we can brush it off and turn up to the next meeting. And there can be other days where something feels like a straw breaks the camel's back. And whenever we're engaging with another human being, seeking to better understand them, one, what it means to be them in the world today, what microaggressions they might face, what kind of privilege they might hold, but also looking at them as a holistic person and thinking about why are they doing this? Why is there a reason for any behavior I see that is imperfect or not the way I would want? And being able to just engage at that human level, I think, is the best way to engage in allyship. It's not just about inclusivity. I think it's about humanity.
That was beautiful. Thank you. Mira, what about you? One piece of advice for everyone on driving more inclusivity, what would it be?
Yeah, I'm not sure I can follow how eloquently Grace just put hers, but mine would be probably when you're hiring, don't hire for culture fit and hire for culture add. The more that you're adding to your culture through diversity of thought and background, the more people you then have to help foster a really inclusive environment. Think about how you can continuously improve things, and diversity, inclusion, being a good ally. You're never going to finish those things. That's an ongoing part of any business. And we really need to acknowledge where we've got a problem. Don't be afraid to recognize it. It can be really uncomfortable. But once you do that, you can genuinely then start to make some positive changes as well.
Great, thank you. Angela, what piece of advice would you give everyone?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes up for me is this idea of doing your own work first. I mean, for all of us, no matter where we're starting from, something that really comes up for me. It really resonated with what both the other panelists said, and particularly Grace, what really resonated for me is this idea of humanity. But I don't think we're going to be able to get there until we recognize that organizations and systems, they're emotional systems, and we don't have a society or organizations yet that really focus on emotional literacy. And I think you can't really start to build that human connection until we have more emotionally literate organizations. I see the difference in education now. I see the kind of education my daughter's getting compared to the education I had. And there is more of a focus on being emotionally literate, but we're way behind inside organizations. And if there was one thing that I think we could emphasize more and put more energy into, it's that. As companies, individually, I think it's about doing your own work first. Okay, I'm going to repeat those three because I thought they were.
Okay, I'm going to repeat those three because I thought they were really powerful. So Grace really beautifully, and I won't do it nearly as well, but she basically said, look at the person in front of you and recognize them as a full human being from all aspects. Mira, as we think about what we're building in companies and how do we drive inclusivity, it's not just the activities we do, but she said, hire for culture add, not culture fit. I thought that was great. And Angela, do your own work first, and the concept of emotional literacy, I thought was terrific. So we have a couple of questions that came in from the audience. Grace, and I don't know if people can see these, so I'm just going to read them. Grace, the first one is to you, and the second one I'll ask broadly to Mira and Angela. But Grace, it says, firstly, thank you for sharing your incredible story. Truly remarkable. Now in my 30s and having recently joined Google, this is the first company I've worked for where I felt comfortable enough to be open about my sexuality in a professional setting. With being new and entirely remote, the topic or partners or family comes up quite often in introductory meetings. How did you find the courage to be so open about your gender identity in the workplace?
Thank you. And I'm really glad you're feeling comfortable bringing your sexual identity to work. I think it's a really hard thing to do. I think it's worth calling out the difference between being out in the wider world and being out at work, is there's a fear you might be disenfranchised or even penalized for that. For me, I like to think about the fact that every time I engage with someone and I see they I perceive they might have a problem with my identity, the first thing I recognize is that's a narrative I've created, and I need to check if that's the case. I think it's really, really common that people might be absolutely fine, but they're not expecting to hear that information. So if people are talking about families and you're talking about your partner and they expect them to be of one gender and they're of another, you'll see a micro expression of shock on their face, not assuming that that's a negative reaction. Often people really, really want to do well. So holding that best in mind. But also it's a wonderful barometer to determine who you want to engage with and who's right. So who's right for you as you build up your network at work? Who do you want to spend more time with? It involves continuous bravery. And I think one of the things about the situation we're talking about here is, you'll know you have to come out 10 times a day. You meet an old school friend or you go to the dentist, and there are those micro decisions where you think, shall I just avoid this? Shall I use neutral pronouns? I would really encourage you, especially as this is the first time you're doing this at work, just to lean into it as much as possible. And I think we're on the cusp, especially with organizations like Google and every organization on the panel, that if you do encounter prejudice and you do encounter a microaggression, you can take it and know and trust in the fact that it will be seen and you will be heard. That's not to suggest that there'll be a perfect interaction every time. We're all fallible, but I think the more you can do this, the more other people who've not yet been ready to do it will follow suit. And that for me just makes it worthwhile every time.
Thank you very much, Grace. I'm going to squeeze in the last question. Mira and Angela, I'll come to Mira first. Where do you go for inspiration and help continuing to build your skills and knowledge in this space? That was an audience question.
For me, actually, it's the people around me, people that I work with, perhaps people from past careers that I like to connect with. But seeking out people that I know are from a different background to me. And just spending a bit of time with people, having chats with no agenda, just really listening, opening up with each other, and understanding. That's definitely, I think, where I've kind of, got most of my knowledge from.
Great, thanks, Mira. Angela, what about you?
Yeah, definitely. My biggest inspiration for the work that I do is from our employees. And I don't mean my generation or the generation before me. I mean the new generations coming into our workforce. We've been really deliberate about a value of equality and that's meant a significant responsibility now, because you know, the next generations are looking for something different and they want something different, and that's where I get my energy and hope for the future, for sure, when I see all of the amazing talent that's all surrounded around me and who are coming up next.
Okay, thank you so much to our three panelists. You are all not just remarkable leaders, but you're remarkable human beings. It was really fun to listen to your stories. I think the audience probably enjoyed it, hopefully way more and as much and all in as I did. It was incredible. I'd encourage everyone to go to the Pound I Am Remarkable website, and you can find more exciting events that we're doing this week. Thank you again to our three panelists and to everyone for joining us today. Bye-bye.